In the book of Jeremiah, in Jeremiah chapter 9, there are two verses there. And the interesting thing about Jeremiah's book, actually he had two of them, Jeremiah and Lamentations. But Jeremiah lived through the period of the capture of Judah by the Babylonians. When he began prophesying, he was a very young boy, about 13 years old. And that was one of his arguments to God, is I'm too young. And God, of course, answered that by giving him the charge over again. But Jeremiah is talking about a nation that was chosen to be the people of God through Abraham, and these were his descendants. And he is talking about the fact that they were going to lose their recognition as God's chosen nation. And not only that, they were going to lose their recognition as a sovereign nation and were going to be carried into captivity. Now, he doesn't say specifically that this is the cause, but he does mention three problems that they possessed. And these three problems are problems that will cause men to sometimes find themselves in great difficulty. And always will cause men, if they don't correct these three problems, to be lost eternally. Thus saith the Lord, he said, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches. Now, this particular statement is a statement that has to do with what's valuable and what's not. And he mentions three things that have limited value. He's not saying they're of no value at all, but he's simply saying we have to recognize their limitations, which we'll point out in the end of the lesson. Three things that men value. And you know, nothing has really changed. If you were to look at the United States today, and you consider the commercials that you see on television, particularly on serious channels that are news channels and weather channels, not entertainment channels, their advertisements generally will have to do with the accumulation of wisdom. They advertise colleges and various means of gaining knowledge that is considered to be wisdom. There are advertisements that deal with things that will help us to maintain our ability to do things, to have our strength that is characteristic of youth. So we have all kinds of advertisements that have to do with maintaining youth so that we might maintain our strength. And then the other commercials that you see have to do with managing our wealth so that we can become extremely wealthy. Well, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Gaining knowledge that we might be wiser if we use knowledge acceptably. Having might to be able to do things is certainly admirable. And having enough money that we're not dependent upon other people and we can support ourselves in retirement, those are admirable qualities. And they're things that we ought to desire. But at the same time, we have to remember that they're not things to be gloried in. They're not things to be put at the top of our priority list. He says, let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me. Now you think about that. If you're going to glory in anything, you glory in understanding who God is and know Him. That is, have a relationship with Him. That I am the Lord which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, saith the Lord. In other words, these are the important things. There are things that are incidental, and we ought to consider them to be incidental. Having knowledge and wisdom are incidental things. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're incidental. They're not the main purpose of life. They're kind of like if you look at the Academy Awards, and you have the best actor, and then you have the best supporting actor, or the best supporting actress. These are things that support the greater. And so we're saying that wisdom and knowledge and physical strength and riches, there's nothing wrong with those things, and they make our lives certainly better. But they're incidentals to that which is really important, and that is having an understanding of God and having a relationship with Him. Now, let's go down the list a little bit, and let's think about these three things, and that man values most. And I don't believe there's any question. If you would ask me the question right now, what three things do people value more than anything else? Now, you might say their family, but we're not really dealing with that situation. We're talking about three material things: wisdom and knowledge, physical strength and endurance, and wealth. Those are three things that people put a lot of emphasis on. And whether their family ranks up there or not, I don't know. If you remember the old song, The Cat's in the Cradle, you might remember that's what the song was about, telling you what people really value. What they value is their wisdom, their strength, and their wealth. And sometimes miss out on that which is really important. But let's look at these three things that people value. Well, not much has changed over the years. In the 21st century, the TV advertisements tell you what's important to people, because that's the thing that they're selling you, and the only reason they're selling it is because it's what they know you want. If you go back to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 2 and verse 12, this wise man, and you've studied this book many times, and we've had classes on it. We've actually had several sermons preached about it. And one time I tried an experiment. I just read the book. Didn't even really comment on it. Pretty self-explanatory. It is a book that talks about what man values. That's what it's about. And it talks about, when you look at what man values, it is what he values really what's most valuable. Well, in Ecclesiastes 2, in verse 12 beginning, he said, I turned myself to wisdom and madness and folly. Well, what can the man do that cometh after the king? Even that which hath already been done. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one of them happened to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happened to the fool, so it happened even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, that is also his vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise man more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And then he said this, how dieth the wise man as the fool? Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. So what he's saying is this. In our generation, there were many people who would have believed, and maybe they were right, that Stephen Hawking was the most brilliant mind in the 20th century on into the 21st. Now that was an arguable position, but a lot of people argued that truth and say he was. When it came to the time of his death, what differed him from a homeless man who slept under a bridge in Nashville? Nothing. They both died. And that's the point he's making. What he's making, the point he's making is that wisdom and knowledge, they're great things, but they have no application and no benefit beyond the time of your death. That's the point he's making. That's what he's telling you. He's saying you have to kind of be careful when you're putting all your eggs in that basket. And then in chapter 11, he talks about physical strength. You know, we normally equate youth with physical strength. And normally, that would be accurately so. Today we have a Super Bowl. There's an old man that's going to be the quarterback for one of those teams. But he doesn't live in a nursing home. Not even an assisted living. How old is he? I don't remember. 41, 2, 3, I don't know. I consider that to be pretty young. But in the world of sports, he's ancient. In the world of quarterbacks, I mean, it's almost unheard of. Very few people ever, and people to actually still be good at it, just very few of them. If you remember, when Peyton Manning had his last Super Bowl and actually won it, he had one of the poorest performances of any quarterback in history. He just had a good enough team to win the thing. But I got a feeling this quarterback will be a little bit different than that. So we tend to think, and we even realize today, that equating strength and physical stamina is equated with youth. And so he talks about youth. And what he's really talking about is the time that we're young and we can do all these things. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth. Let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and the sight of thine eyes. I mean, you know, there are a lot of things you can do, and you can have excitement. There are all these things you get involved in. Nothing wrong with that. But know thou, that for all these things God will bring into judgment. And therefore he says, therefore remove sorrow from thy heart, and put away evil from thy flesh, for chapter or vanity. You know, one of the problems that we have sometimes is we look at people differently than ourselves. Now, I'm to the age when I go out sometimes and see people, and I see folks that I went to school with, and I come home and tell Pat, I said, boy, they sure have gotten old. But, you know, I never stopped to think. They probably went home and told their wife the same thing. Boy, sure has gotten old. Realize what he's saying. He then says, remember now the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. And then he begins to talk about the aging process. And at the end of that discussion of the aging process, he says, or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken in the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. I've commented several times. At any given point in time, over the past several years, when there has been mention made of the oldest living human being, it generally is about the year 117. That usually is correct. I don't know when I've heard of somebody being 120. Most of the time, 117 is about the absolute pushing the limits. So what he's telling you is to say, you know, physical strength, sometimes we think, make us able to handle anything that comes our way, but understand one thing. Sooner than you think, it'll no longer be there. Then think about this. Riches. Let's go back to chapter 6. Let's jump back over to chapter 6 and look at verse 1 and 2. And then look down a little bit to chapter 7, verse 1. Chapter 7, verse 1 and 2, he said, there's an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. Man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing. For he sold all he desireth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity and is an evil disease. Verse 11 and 12, he says, seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for a man in his life, all the days of his vain life, which he spendeth as a shadow? For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? I know a gentleman now who possesses a very valuable piece of property, almost 200 acres, very valuable piece of property. And he's been very concerned over the last several years as he grows older that it's his family, his home place. He wants his children to possess it. But the problem was that he didn't think any of his children wanted it. And it just delighted him that he found out one of his children did. Let me tell you something. I don't know when the point will come, but because of where the property is located and all, there will come a point in time. Maybe now that his daughter's taken the property, maybe she won't. But at some point, somebody's going to sell it and divide it without question. And that's what the wise man says. Riches, you may know how to handle them well. You may do well with it. I once remodeled a house that Farmers Bank had repossessed. And the person who had owned the house from whom it was repossessed had inherited the house debt-free from his grandmother. He inherited the house and had no debt. In a short period of time, he lost it. Because evidently he had borrowed money against it. And he lost it. So you really don't have any control over that. I mean, you stop and think. You spend all the time gathering wealth, but you give it to somebody, you know what they're going to do with it. That's what he tells you. You may write up a will and you may think it takes care of all the problems, but a lot of folks have discovered that's just not true. And that passage in chapter 7 and verse 1, I've read at so many funerals. The good name is better than precious ointment. The day of death and the day of one's birth. When your life is over, it will be revealed what was important to you. At that point, everybody can see, by looking back at the way you spent it, what was important. And one thing you won't have people say, you're not going to have people standing up and commenting about, I'm going to tell you what was great about this man. He possesses more money than anybody I know. I don't know that I've ever heard that at a funeral, ever. All these things have their limitations. Wisdom, it has limitations. Physical strength, youth, short-lived. Riches, well, a lot of things riches can't do. Chapter 7, verse 12 through verse 14 says this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there is profit to them that see the sun. Notice what he said. Profit to them that see the sun. Wisdom is a defense. And he goes on to say, money is a defense. But the excellency knowledge that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Notice what he said. Giveth life to them that have it. Consider the work of God. For who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? In the day of prosperity, when your youth, be joyful. But in the day of adversity, I listened to two fellows in the nursing home one day, and I walked in the door and I heard one say to the other one, I wasn't visiting them, just heard them say. He looked at the other one, he said, there ain't much golden about the golden years, is there? Well, I kind of agree with him to a certain degree. God also has set the one over against the other to the end that man should find nothing after. What he's telling you is, just be careful. All the things we consider valuable, they have their limitations. And you know what their limitations are? The day they put you in the ground, they have no further value to you. And that's pretty shocking, but that's the truth. So let's think about this. If we look at what God tells us is valuable, what is valuable? Well, remember in that passage we were reading in Jeremiah chapter 9, and verse 23 and 24, Chapter 9 talks about the riches, and he talks about the wisdom, and he talks about the strength, and how we have to be careful about that. But remember we read in the verse 24, he said, let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, that is, has a relationship, that I am the Lord. Now you think about that. And then you turn back to this book of Ecclesiastes again, when he had looked at all these things and he had tried to find what was valuable and what was important and what he should consider to be something worthy of his time, you know what he finally said? He said, well, here's the truth. You get to the end of it, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was. That's true. But there's an important statement here. The Spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Now just think about that. What's more important? Well, you're given a fleshly existence. You're conceived. 9 months later or so, you're born. And then you live for X number of years. And if you look at the oldest person living, you could expect that you could make it to 117. Maybe. But at the end of that, it's over. So you're talking about 117, 118 years out of the chunk of eternity. That's what you're talking about. On the other hand, there's a spirit that you possess from the time of your conception also. It lasted 117 years. But as the song says, when that spirit has gone to be with God, when we've been there 10,000 years, make no difference. No less days to sing His praise. Now you think about that. So what's valuable to you? What's valuable? Wisdom, strength, riches, or your spirit? You know, Peter, when Jesus was only 33 years old, he was going to die. And he made a statement to his apostles to that effect, that he would be killed, in verse 31. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him. When he turned about and looked on his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get thee behind me, Satan. For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of man." So Peter rebuked Jesus for speaking of dying. In other words, he said, don't talk like that. You're just 33 years old. You're not going to die. You're going to be an old man. And Jesus looked at him and said, you know, you have a basic problem here. You think of life being all that's valuable, and I realize, being the Son of God exists in eternity, that it's not. Get thee behind me, Satan. You don't savor the things that be of God. You're looking at only the things that be of man. And when you begin then to look at what he then says, he tells Peter this: the most valuable thing in your life is not wisdom, strength, or wealth. That's not the most valuable thing. The most valuable thing is where your soul spends eternity. Verse 34, when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, whosoever shall come after me, let him deny himself. And that would mean wisdom and strength and health. But those things are incidentals. For whosoever shall save his life shall lose it. Whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. And then he makes this famous statement. What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. In adolescent circles today, if you mention the devil and Daniel Webster or the devil and Tom Walker, they probably know what you're talking about. I don't think schools really teach American literature the way they once did. Two very famous stories. Both of them, people made a deal with the devil. But I tell you what, you may not remember them, but you remember probably Charlie Daniels, don't you? The devil went down to Georgia and he made a deal. That's what he's looking for. The whole idea is, what do you value? What do you value? Where your soul spends eternity. You know, it's kind of interesting to think about. Familiar passages that we've read so many times, and the things we look at and the things we try to learn from them. Sometimes we get so involved in the details that we kind of forget what the whole point of it was. In Luke 16, if you begin reading in verse 19, and really if you just read through verse 25, you kind of understand what the whole point of this thing is. There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. Didn't have a bad day in his life. There was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores. Didn't have a good day in his life. And desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. But the rich man also died and was buried, and in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeing Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, think about what's valuable and what's not. Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted and thou art tormented. In the final analysis, if I ask you a question, which of these two men was successful, what would be the answer? Well, most people would look at it, if they were looking from this side, return and say, well, that's pretty easy. That rich fellow, he was successful. Lazarus was just a loser. But if you look at it from the other side of death, who was successful? Think about it. In Jeremiah, he makes it pretty clear. When I read that, I thought, I've got to take that and use it a little more than just in the lesson. Hopefully it's been useful to you. I've learned a long time ago, catchy little sermons that people really enjoy hearing may not be the best ones, but just common, simple truths are what's best. What's important in your life? Is your soul? But it needs to be, because eventually the only thing you're going to have left will be your soul. All the riches you have, you won't have. All the strength you once possessed, you won't have. And you look at all those things, all the wisdom you had, it'll perish with you. You know, sometimes my father was an interesting character. And I really thought to myself, and I've said many times to many people, I wish before he died I would have sat down and really had him tell me some of those things in his life that just were interesting to hear. Because here's the problem. I don't remember them well anymore. Can't really repeat them accurately. And the same thing is true with Albert Einstein, with all the things that he possessed. When he died, he carried the wisdom with him. And when you're talking about, I once went to a place in South Carolina, and you may have been there too, Jekyll Island. And I went there, and there was a poker table in a room, and there's a note on the poker table that said that at one time, 1/4 of the world's wealth, total wealth, 1/4 of it could have been wagered on that table with those men who were sitting there. They were names like Goodyear, Firestone, Vanderbilt. But where are they now? And what do they possess? It's interesting to think about that. Your soul. Think about this song. You know, we can repent, be baptized, simple act. Give us the hope of eternal life. We have to live faithfully before God so that we can stand before Him and say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Think about those things as together we stand as we sing.